The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, Hardening Retail Security, Why and How to Prevent Breaches and Attacks, sponsored by LogRhythm. My name is Jason Crafton, and I'll be moderating this webcast. Today's featured speakers are John Pescatore and Erick Ingleby. If at any point you have any questions for John or Erick, you may enter them into the questions window on the GoToWebinar interface. We will be answering them during the question and answer session at the end of this webcast. We do also have some polling questions during this webcast, so please answer the questions as they become available. And with that, I would like to hand the presentation over to John.
Okay, thanks Jason, and welcome everyone. I'm John Pescatore from SANS, and you're probably seeing the polling questions now on your screen. You'll have a chance to answer them. And let me give you an indication of what we're going to do here. The topic of how to improve security in a retail environment, how, when, and why to do that is a pretty common and popular topic. The Home Depot breach is certainly filling up the news, and everybody can identify with the problems that security team's going to have when it's something that was running for 5 months and nobody noticed. So we're going to spend a lot of time. I'll up front sort of set the stage for the overall issue, and then I'm going to turn things over to Erick Ingleby from LogRhythm, and he'll sort of drill down into the issues and into some of the solutions, some of the ways you can get ahead of the problems, specifically in a retail and point-of-sale environment. Okay, now, unfortunately, I'm seeing the polling questions myself. I'm trying to figure out how to change the page here. There we go. Okay, so just want to remind you that as we go along, you'll have questions. When you do have questions, enter them into a little question window on that panel on your right-hand side where you see the questions. We'll get to them in the end. Some of them we might answer as we go along, but we'll definitely get to them in the end. So with that, let's get going. So, the bottom line is there's no season in security. If you think about it, we're coming to the end of the baseball season here, and all the baseball teams will get a chance to lick their wounds and fix their injuries and plan for next year. Unfortunately, in security, there's no off season. We have to keep improving while the attackers are changing what they're doing, and the attackers are certainly targeting retail. It's a pretty high payback target, as we can see from, I think just today, Jimmy John's Pizza had to announce they have a huge breach that's been going on for months, and Home Depot and Target and Michael's and so on. So they're definitely aimed at retail, the point-of-sale environments in particular, but I would say retail overall. Now, if you're in retail or if you do anything with credit card payments, you have to deal with the payment card industry, data security standards, compliance regime, which, is sort of a security 101 kind of thing. It's got a lot of the right things to do in security, but as a compliance regime, it's very much oriented towards protecting the card brands and compliance, which is not the same as security. So if you don't take the right approach to sort of saying we need to protect our customers and our business, and then we can demonstrate compliance to PCI, that whole PCI thing can divert a lot of resources away from security and towards compliance. The bottom line is we've got to leverage the things we have to do to protect card data and customer data and personal health information to be able to prevent more attacks, the ones we can't prevent, and there's going to be plenty we can't, that we're more quickly detecting them. Hopefully it's 5 hours and not 5 months when we detect these things, and that we respond more efficiently and more effectively. More quickly stem the bleeding, reduce the cost to the customer, and also learn from incidents so that we don't fall for the same thing twice, that we're eliminating root causes. So years ago, I'll take the blame for sort of being the first to introduce the idea that we're often playing whack-a-mole in security, and something pops up and we grab another hammer and try to bash it down into its hole. I did this in England. They said it's really called Bop-a-rat, if you're listening to us from England here. Anyway, it sounded good and talked a lot about we really ought to move to be more like chess, more strategic thinking, think moves ahead. Well, the problem is the bad guys don't have a constrained playing field. They don't have to move 2 spaces up and 1 to the right. They can sort of do whatever they want and jump all over the place. The same is true with the IT side. All of a sudden, everybody wants to use mobile devices and cloud and location and mobile apps. And these advances in IT and these advances in threats occur on unpredictable schedules. In fact, today, you're probably hearing about the vulnerability in the born-again shell, or what they're calling the shell shock attacks. That'll sort of be this month's heartbleed, a very serious vulnerability in just about every version of Linux and other things that are running out there. That's certainly not something we could have planned for even 2 weeks ago. So I decided I'd come up with a new game metaphor. You know, if you think about the CEO of your company, he's used to dealing with unexpected things and hearing from his business people. And when he has business people coming to him asking for his or her money to make an investment, you know, he gets to know which of the people coming to him are usually headed in the right direction, which aren't. And the way I sort of put this is, if you remember the old game Chutes and Ladders, you know, some people are known as ladders. Usually when they have an idea, it helps the company move forward. And other people, well, as often as not, they say something, we go in the exact opposite direction, right? We want to be able to land on spot 28 here and zoom all the way up to 84 and not, you know, make some security decisions that either aren't going to work or are going to impede the business and sort of gain security a reputation for actually being as much a problem as the attackers are. So the real key is, you know, what sort of things can we do, can we propose, can we go forth for the budget that we're going to be seen as we're both increasing security and helping the business. So when you sort of drill down specifically into retail environments, here's a little a diagram of how the target attack went by securityintelligence.com. And it follows a common pattern with a little bit of difference here. In this case, at step 1 and 2, the attackers there actually targeted a third-party contractor, the HVAC contractor for target. But once you get to step 3, after they've gotten access through stolen credentials and they install their payload, their malware payload, in this case on a Windows file server, and later on it gets installs other packages out on the actual POS systems or the registers or tills attached to point-of-sale type devices. And then, of course, you know, RAM scraping and so on, and exfiltration of data out to command and control centers. The Home Depot one, I haven't yet heard a credible description of the first couple of steps, but same exact steps from 3A to 6 here when you look how that happened. So if you think about it, we had many opportunities to disrupt this. You know, certainly we could have prevented many things if we were using stronger authentication for remote access, if we had whitelisting or other forms of lockdown on our point-of-sale terminals, and so on and so forth. But even if we could not do those things, many companies can't do those things for business reasons, many opportunities to detect this typical breach in process, if not as early as step 2, then certainly in step 3, 4, 5, and 6, and so on. And that's where we'll hear LogRhythm drill down on some very nice ways to do that type of thing. This had been detected at when that first payload was installed on the file server level. This could have been disrupted without any card data being sent out into the cold crew world. If it was disrupted during exfiltration, instead of 40 million or 70 million getting out, maybe it would have only been 2 million. Instead of costing Target 162 million, maybe it would only cost them 20 million. In fact, I think they said their insurance covered 27 million. Maybe if they detected it more quickly, insurance would have borne the whole burden of the attack. So the key is, you know, again, what can we do to prevent things? What can we do to monitor better and more continuously to disrupt things, detect things, and disrupt attacks earlier is very key. Now, since this is a SANS webcast, I'd like to put everything in context of the critical security controls, a core effort that SANS has been supporting for many years, sort of the 20 most important things to do in disrupting real-world attacks. And I've highlighted in red the ones that are really apropos to what we're going to be talking about here, and particularly what LogRhythm will be showing you. You know, the first couple controls are all about knowing what's on your network, knowing what software is on every device, and knowing when it changes and when it becomes vulnerable. And then being able to look at the logs and the information you do have coming from all those endpoints, whether they're servers, PCs, point-of-sale terminals, firewalls, IDS systems, whatever, and being able to take action, being able to use all that information to take more quick, more effective, more rapid, and more efficient action in disrupting things. So you should now be seeing sort of our next question, next polling question, asking you if you have any way to baseline your point-of-sale systems. Just a little note, if you fill this out, they'll be pulling together all the information, producing a little report, and sending it to everybody as we after the webcast is over and after everything is posted on the website, and you'll have a chance to vote on what you see, read on what you voted on. So with the critical security controls in mind, the next thing I'd like to point out, there's been a number of efforts sort of looking at different industries, different attacks in different industries, different breaches, and sort of mapping those breaches to which security controls, if done right, would have disrupted that breach. In particular, Verizon has done the most effective one, I think, of showing all their data. They do an annual thing called the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, or DBIR. And what you see on your screen there, down the left, you see groupings of the critical security controls that I showed you on the previous slide. And across the top, you see different vertical industries. And in the intersection of there in the little boxes, the darker it is, the more incidents Verizon investigated, where if that particular control had been done right, the incident would have been disrupted or the damage much more minimized. And you can certainly see, if you look up top, things like standard configuration, sort of you go across the industries and you see almost in every attack that happened, and simple things like boundary defense. But you also see in particular industries that you might be in, if you're not all in retail, you might see specific areas where the attacks are going against specific vulnerabilities or in specific controls. But you know, what's very key is there's many opportunities before the attack to detect vulnerable configurations and avoid attacks, so that when they're doing scanning, looking for an unpatched piece of Linux for this latest bash vulnerability or for Heartbleed or anything else, that they'll pass by your site. But there's also many opportunities to then later, if you can't fix the vulnerabilities, to quickly detect the first attempts to exploit those vulnerabilities. And that these days is just as important. So sort of summarizing before I turn it over to Erick, what we're really trying to do is not just know which security controls we should be doing and what things we should look at. We're trying to do this in a more continuous fashion. You know, again, you really cannot say there's any rhyme or reason when the attacks are going to happen. So we have to do things in a continuous manner. Payment card industry says vulnerability scanning 4 times a year. That's the minimum. Anybody knows that's not enough. Things change on your systems more than 4 times a year. In fact, things might change on a daily basis if you're using a website, which most of us are. So when we look at this type of cycle, on the outside I've listed many of the critical security controls. On the inside, the standard sort of cycle to put in place. Can we baseline what's on our network, what's on the networks in our stores? Can we determine what vulnerabilities are out there, and do we know what threats there are against those vulnerabilities, so we can decide what's at risk, which of our assets are currently at risk, and then what can we do to shield against those? For example, the bash vulnerability came out. There's already some mod security scripts where you can essentially put a web application firewall in front of vulnerable systems that have the bash vulnerability so you can patch them. So there's some vulnerabilities we're going to shield. There's others we'll be able to fix more quickly or mitigate. And then from all that, we need to learn what are the areas where vulnerabilities keep coming back. And point-of-sale systems are one great example of how sort of the same problems keep coming back, and some things we just can't fix. Whitelisting would be a great thing to do on the cash registers or the PCs attached to the tills or registers. Many companies can't do it. Turning on host-based intrusion prevention would be a great thing to do on point-of-sale. Many companies, for business reasons, can't do that. That's great. If you can't eliminate that root cause, then we know in those areas we're likely to have that problem reoccur. We better do more continuous monitoring of those higher risk areas. And I think point-of-sale systems just inevitably fall into that. There's certainly reporting to be done. You know, the job's not finished till the paperwork's submitted. But the reality is, reporting we're pretty good at. Monitoring and quickly noticing when something's changed or when vulnerability is being exploited is really key. Having that situational awareness and actually getting value from all that data we're collecting beyond simple reporting is very key. So with that, that's sort of a high-level overview of some of the key issues to think of. I'm now going to turn it over to Erick Ingleby of LogRhythm, and you should be seeing your final polling question up on your screen now. So over to you, Erick.
Thanks, John, and welcome everybody again. So I'm just going to go over some of the stuff we're looking at here at LogRhythm that's kind of in line with what SANS is doing and talking about here with critical controls. As soon as the slide comes back up, I'll continue into it, but and I might even re-echo some of John's highlights there with the Verizon data breach report and some target information. Let's see. All right, great. All right, so just a quick rundown of some numbers again, and John already touched on this, but there was 40 million credit cards stolen in the target breach. Drop in profit, 46%, 200 million in damages. And really everybody should be thinking about what assets, whether it's POS systems or any in general assets, could cost your company money if they are compromised. So I'm going to look at I'm going to try and dig a little bit beyond PCI. I'm not saying PCI isn't good enough. It definitely is, but there are some critical systems that we can pay special attention to in order to try and catch these advanced threats. So we took a hard look at POS system, back office systems, network communication, and in a lot of retail environments, these can be difficult things to monitor. You can always end up, you can always put your antivirus on the endpoint. Some people will have that host-based intrusion prevention, but hopefully your network communications are encrypted. You're securing your payment systems. So we need to come up with unique ways in order to monitor some of these systems that may not lend themselves to normal monitoring, like encrypted communications and such. And we know this is where the attackers are focusing, so we want to make sure that we're focusing some attention there as well. Again, maybe another echo from John here, but resurgent of RAM scraping malware. This is actually straight out of the Verizon data breach report, and it creates, a threat to our POS systems for intrusions. PCI covers, as I said earlier, a number of controls, but organizations may still remain vulnerable, especially if they can't see what's going on in certain remote stores and POS systems that are encrypting everything. So how do we get a little more focused on those critical assets at the end, without adding too much complexity, or adding additional layers of visibility for security analysts. Oh, excuse me, I hit the wrong button there. So this is, a typical POS system network. You have your back office systems, your front of the house systems, and you have encrypted communication there. And as John said, sometimes baselining you can do, sometimes whitelisting is a great way to go if you have those resources. And what you might want to look for in those baselining and whitelist is your typical communications. That way when you do see a deviation in either files accessed or traffic patterns, you can recognize and corroborate multiple events. And so this will lead you into, and my next slides I'm going to go over some recommended starting points. I wouldn't say it's the Holy Grail or the Bible of what you should absolutely baseline or recommend. But really, what I'm hoping you guys take away from this today is it's certain signature-based attack patterns, whether that's a virus or a denial of service attack. A lot of these signature-based attacks that we can detect are really getting blocked at the endpoints, at runtime, whether that's blocked at a firewall or blocked by your antivirus program from running. But how hard is it really for like a huge botnet to be stood up and have a virus communicate to another place or change one piece of the code so it doesn't match that virus signature? So really what I hope you start looking at here is how do we get into this behavioral almost identification where it's not necessarily a signature that we're matching, but start thinking about, you know, the behavior of the attacker or the behavior of malware-based devices, where we can start to understand what they do and how to identify them when they don't match that perfect signature. So here's where I'd start. When I look at POS systems, and I do have a customer that I've actually deployed this on, and I'll kind of show you some of the findings there. But I definitely want to understand the processes running, and this can be a daunting task for some organizations. You know, not everybody understands every process that needs to be running on their POS device. So look for analytic tools that can help you learn and either whitelist or trend these things. And you don't necessarily have to have a new agent on every endpoint. You can trend the logs that PCI is asking you to collect. You can trend from whatever's collecting your file integrity monitoring. Figure out how often these things are accessed, what's running, and when they're running, and figure out when it's deviating from the norm. Registry changes are also essential. Changes in file systems and potential authentication activity. This gets complicated when you get into really big retailers, but if you're a smaller shop and you're looking, you know, to really secure those things, you know, you could potentially even trend or whitelist authentication activity, both by number of times or time of day. So where do we look to get this logs? Or, you know, some OSs can audit it, and we definitely want to be collecting that data. Otherwise, if your OS isn't capable of monitoring it, maybe that is when you want to start looking into endpoint monitoring solutions, so you can really get the audit data that you need in order to successfully identify anything new going on these endpoint systems. You also want to do, you know, again, I know manual whitelisting is not always ideal, especially in larger systems, but really if you're going to move from a static signature-based detection mechanism into a more highly adept environment to identify anomalies or behavioral changes, you really need to do some type of whitelisting, whether that's on the applications that are running on your endpoints, or the users that are logging in, the network connections they're making, or you can do something like peer trending, and this is gaining some momentum these days. It's not a bad idea if you have the ability to make a gold system of like your endpoint point of sale system. Stand it up in a lab, maybe trend or watch what's going on in a brand new store that stands up. And understand what processes should be running on there, what users should be authenticating, what registry entries are valid, and then compare that to like devices working across multiple stores, multiple networks, and trend. You know, find the anomaly amongst all of those if there is one, and then identify that for further investigation. Again, I just want to stress this should by all means not be the holy grail or the absolute final list of everything you should monitor for trends and changes. I would say every environment's going to be a bit different, but do take these as maybe starting points. I would always look at your registry, and especially in the auto start paths. Malware loves to embed itself there, and if you know when new additions are in those auto start paths or changes, if you can compare hashes to the registry values there, even better. But have some simple alarming going on. When something is added into an auto start path on your endpoint systems, it's a great first indication that something has changed that requires analysts to go and take a deeper look. Additionally, you want to know when file system changes are made, and if you're in the retail environment and you're complying with PCI, you already have some type of FIM solution down there. Utilize that FIM solution not only just for your point of sale systems, but utilize it for your critical operating system files or any critical program files that you may need in order to run, or that could potentially be compromised in order to take advantage of the system. Look at the data, audit it often, and make sure you have some type of understanding of potentially when authorized file system changes are being made, and by who. So that leads me into the last bullet there. Authentication activity is critical. You should have an understanding of who your employees are, and identify the ones that have been terminated, and be able to make a comparison, both in user logins and then potentially by time of day. If you do have the advanced analytics capability, maybe you want to even histogram when users log in, and compare it chart by chart over time of day. Jan works at store 103. Her general office hours are from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. and she should normally be logging in out of that. If I see any large deviation above 20% outside of that norm, that's something I probably want to know about, and I want to get an alert for. All right, so we need to also look at the network, and as I mentioned earlier, your network is likely encrypted. Hopefully it is, but credit card data does fly across your network, but it should be in pretty limited fashion, especially in your endpoint stores. You could hopefully trend network connections at those endpoint stores where you can say, this is my payment processor, this is my point of sale system, this is my back of house system. There shouldn't be too many connections those three systems are making outside of the norm. I don't want to see random UDP traffic. I don't want to see new processes starting on those systems communicating out to the World Wide Web. My connections should be secure, and they should be generally identifiable as going to one of those three endpoints, unless you have some rare exception there. But I'd say that's a good place to start. If you can, add some network forensic data there, whether that's at layer 7 where you could get total packet capture and rebuilding. This will help you identify when somebody's perhaps tunneling over port 443 that's secure. Maybe somebody's got a netcat listener somehow on there, and they're sending unencrypted traffic. You want to be able to identify that type of activity. Again, collect flow data if you can't get that layer, if you don't have the budget for that layer 7 network forensic data. At least collect some flow data out of your network devices there, and understand how much, if you can, start to understand, what's your general traffic in compared to your, the amount of bytes going out of your network, and see how that deviates from time to time. If you're a retail store that specializes in, say food service, like McDonald's or something, I would expect, lunch, breakfast, and dinner hours to be your busiest, and perhaps, again, maybe I can use a histogram or some type of trending in and out of the store. I'm processing the most transactions, so I have a larger window there in comparison to 1 a.m. where I wouldn't expect to see that much data that I see at dinner, as much data going out at dinner time as I might see at 1 a.m. And that, again, also something I might want to look at and be alerted to. And at no point would I take any single point of a single alert, to mean 100% I'm compromised. But as we're going through these, if you're monitoring your files, if you're monitoring your network, if you're monitoring your user activity, you're monitoring your logs, once you start making multiple points of variation, if you start seeing that, and hopefully I can show you that here in just a second, but once you see many points of deviation from the norm, that's when you can be more confident in the ability to identify that something is wrong on your network or your POS systems, and you definitely want to take further action on it. So changes in network activity, again, and I've already kind of covered some of these additional points, but they can also be inferred upon network activity. Sample whitelisting, while difficult, does provide you a level of insight on your network that you may not get anywhere else. And again, peer trending can be most helpful if you do have those advanced analytic capabilities. Communication with known hosts or new hosts is always good, but known hosts is always good, but communication with new hosts, vet that out. If you put a new host out on your network, then you should already know about it, and you should be able to have already whitelisted it. So new hosts appearing on your network, imagine if Imagine if Target, had the ability to perhaps identify a new process or a new host on their network that wasn't there before, and somehow bubble that up to the top, because we do know that they collected all the logs for that, and they were identified, but they had so many alerts and so many events that didn't bubble up to the top to catch anybody's attention. With the new bash exploit out there, what if you took some of these capabilities that you have at your endpoint and look at your bash history, look at the headers in your HTTP requests, understand them, trend them, whitelist good ones, and then get alerted to when somebody's potentially trying to exploit that before your change control process can go through, and you can get this patch into to prevent exploit of your POS systems. And again, so far, I've really been talking about behavioral indicators and not the static ones. To get a new command and control server these days, it's not all that difficult for a lot of attackers. You have those Tor sites. You can rent hundreds out for pennies on the dollar. You can modify code very easily. So we almost need to start making a move away from those one-off signature-based attacks and start looking at behaviors both of users, network devices, registry, operating systems, anything you can trend and understand the behavior of known good versus unknown, and then go identify those unknown. Will help you all that much more secure your endpoint devices and understand what's going on your back-end systems. And so again, I just want to answer the question, does it really work? And I'll scream yes. I'll show you some customer data here in just a second, but when we deployed this on a large retail customer, we quickly found 6 types of malware out there just on the first day, unauthorized file system modifications. One of my favorite ones, I caught an employee plugging in his phone to a POS system just to give it a charge. And while giving your phone a charge is all fine and dandy, the fact that you could plug in a USB device that potentially has storage and the ability to upload something to a POS system is scary. And the reason why they didn't break the USB or just disable it altogether is because some of these POS systems out there require a key in order to activate. So this particular use case, the computer was actually not a POS system unless it had this USB key inserted into it. So they couldn't disable all of the USB ports, and some employees were taking advantage of the fact that you could charge your phone on it, and we were quickly identifying it just because we saw a new device plugged into a system and something auto start, a new process. And we can use similar strategies, not just on endpoints and POS systems or back office systems. You could really extend this theory to any critical file system above and beyond the retail world, but it does work really well in the retail environment. And so, as promised, here's just 3 examples of a customer case study here. The very top one there, the 6 types of malware we discovered. If you can zoom in and make this really big when you're going back and looking through this PDF, I have 2 arrows. The very first one, I have some closed events there because it says I identified a new process on a POS system, and I had gone and already identified the store, and I already identified the process as malicious because I was able to look it up on the web and find a hash value and then compare it to that, and found that it was malicious. And then the reason why I found this particular case study so interesting is because at the time I was filtered quite a ways down on the alerts that were coming into my SIEM, and I didn't actually take the time to notice that I had corroborated that a couple of different ways. I had unknown network traffic there where the second arrow is pointed, and the unknown network traffic was telling me that it looked like malware phoning home. And so to corroborate, I apologize, I didn't mean to go forward here. 2 corroborated events that quickly would have alerted a smart security analyst to go investigate that POS system. And this is the second bullet there. I have already covered it in depth, so I won't go into it again. Found an employee charging his phone. There are a number of other entertaining things that we found going on, but that one was of particular value. the last bullet point here, I'm actually looking at, I was actually working at a retail store that only had U.S. stores, and so when I found, I did this interesting network visualization, and I quickly found the green circle here is a whole bunch of communication to the U.S. And what I found going on there was it's an FTP server down there. Stores would FTP their inventory down at the end of every day and ensure that their inventory could be refilled or stocked up for later. But when I did a quick view of where all the communication was going throughout the network, I found this one anomaly here that was communicating to Japan over port 444, which is a known Metasploit command and control port, which definitely raised some alarms, and we quickly killed some communication and investigated it further. But this is the power of just understanding the behaviors that go on your network. Knowing that you're a U.S.-based retail customer, having interesting outbound connections to Japan should be a worrisome thing. So again, identifying the norm on your network has become more critical. And with that, I'll do a quick show and tell session on my SIEM here, if I could have you make me presenter. And I'm going to. So here, just pulling up my SIEM real quick, and I am watching a POS, a retail type store, and I can drill down into a number of places, but my top common events are kind of worrisome right now. I'm looking through some of these. I have a new process on a POS system, abnormal authentication behavior, and I have this really interesting file monitoring event. The file was changed, but the file was modified, but the hash wasn't changed. So I have a couple things going on that just don't seem right, and I might go over to my alarm tab and let's take a deeper look and dive into this. Prior to the session, I actually closed out some of these events. I was getting abnormal network comms, and I took a quick look, closed out the events. They didn't seem that abnormal for me, so I until I got to this one, and this is where I'm kind of using multiple points of indication to see if my network is compromised. And I have threat lists coming into my SIEM so I can understand when known threats are out in the world. And I stopped closing events right when I got here because this threat list IP came up, and I thought for sure that maybe this is something I want to go dig into further. So again, just a number of ways to drill down and find data that you're looking for. So I'm going to let that dig here for a minute. But I also do have, it's already back. We'll go over and look at some of the data that it's presenting me here. Interesting data, outbound connection, and then it was closed. But again, I'm collecting logs from those devices, not just network traffic. So I might go in here and dig around and see what's going on. And you can see here I have some interesting, I have Google Chrome and Telnet going on a POS system. Now normally I don't authorize Telnet on my POS systems, so this is already raising flags for me, and I'm kind of interested. So I went over to this inferred identity. I just want to infer who's working there. It looks like Caitlin Kennedy is working on that computer right now, and I know Caitlin, she's a good employee. I doubt she'd be doing any of this stuff. And it's telling me that she logged on 47 minutes ago. Keep looking around to see, what else this machine might be doing. And I might go over to the host, and it looks like there's some type of interesting Russian mail traffic being hit. Again, I'm really concerned, so I'm going to dig into this a bit more. And actually, I have this smart response queued up. I did this in advance. If anything hits this alarm, I'm going to add these to a watch list. I want to watch and see what happens later. But as I scroll up here, I'm also noting a couple of interesting items. And from payment system file access, I'm interested to see what that is, as well as it looks like I have some communication from another threat list with known fraudulent activity. I'm going to start digging down on a few of these and see what else is going on here. Abnormal processes. So it looks like I had some interesting network connections that were unknown at this point. And then I have some new processes. And all of these are indicating, if these all come back as the same system, just multiple points of indication, and this is a file monitoring event, and it's got to be one of my critical files. It looks like I'm going to see what kind of application is accessing some of this stuff. Packets in, classification of the log. So one of my POS systems were files were accessed, and normally I've trended this behavior, and so there's something abnormal about this specific one that LogRhythm is alerting me to. So I'm going to go back and look at the other alarm I pulled up right there. That was, I should have closed the tab out. There's communication with a fraudulent site. I didn't pull it up. Let me pull that one up. And let's see what this comes back with. It looks like LogRhythm has classified this as an actual attack, and I'm going to go ahead and look at its Chrome, and I'm going to look at the host that it's going to. And it looks like it's connecting. I can't make this stuff up. I think this is an identifier. If I remember right, We Love Servers, it was identified very recently as a Bitcoin fraud site. So I have plenty of indicators here, and I just went through a number of investigations. All of these are pointing back to my POS system, and new network communication there, followed by a new process, weird file activity, and then communication outbound. So at this point, normally I would go back to my alarms tab, and I'd start remediating the device, and I will do that as soon as we're here. But it's just kind of an indication of all the things I was talking about. I'm monitoring my files, and I went through an entire investigation where I didn't even receive a log from my antivirus, come to think of it, at least that I've found yet. It may be buried up here a bit further. Oh, and actually, LogRhythm identified that POS system, and I might drill down into this one too as one last event, because this smart response, when I see this one, and I've rated these by risk, so as more indicators of compromise have come into the system, there's files accessed, there's a new process on the system, followed or a communication with a known fraudulent threat actor. This 97 risk, 100 being the highest, popped up, and if it is the same system, and we'll find out really quickly, it does think it's compromised, new process on the system, and it is my 2.70. I had actually fired this smart response, which is going to trigger a Cisco ICE event to just go and isolate that system on a new subnet. So I may do that, and then I'll let you guys get back to the webinar here.
Okay, thanks, Eric. I guess Jason will switch us back to the slides here. It's another opportunity for you guys to enter some questions. We got a whole bunch here that I'll start working through. If Eric's demo there triggered some more questions, enter them into that questions window on the right-hand side, and we'll get to as many as we can here. So looks like the first question is actually for me, so I'll take that one. You mentioned that it's hard to do whitelisting in point of sale. I'd like to hear more about that. I think the way I phrased it is there's many businesses that have raised business objections to doing whitelisting or tighter application control at the point of sale point. And here's what I meant. By the way, just Tuesday of this week, I published on the SANS website a little analysis of, this was the Home Depot incident. We used the CyberPoint. CyberPoint's a company that has a tool called CyberPoint Value at Risk, and they use their tool to sort of estimate that in the Home Depot point-of-sale environment, they potentially had $246 million of risk if the point-of-sale systems are compromised. So far, Home Depot said they've spent $62 million already in dealing with this incident. Anyway, I then did a little analysis of if Home Depot was to put whitelisting on all the point-of-sale devices in their 2,200 stores, what would have been a realistic cost? And I used the company SignaCert, who's working with state governments in the multi-state ISAC in a whitelisting effort, and got some pricing for them on the order of $30 per year per device. And if Home Depot had 20,000 devices, That doesn't sound like a big number, 600,000 per year. But when you add in the integration time and all the other costs and servers and admin, blah, 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 I estimated it would have cost $25 million for Home Depot to have put whitelisting software in all their point-of-sale terminals, which is much smaller than $246 million, obviously. But first off, $25 million, it's still a big investment. And on the retail side, often they're going to take a risk. No, that's too expensive. The second reason is in point of sale, and it goes beyond retail point of sale to things like ATM machines and the like, there's often custom executables per store that they want to run on those point of sale devices to remind the cashier to ask, do you want a warranty with that? Do you know we're having a contest? There's often a local executable they want to run. And in the past, they might have had bad experience with if they locked down the cashier or the register, then they couldn't install these local software or these local vendor connections for inventory checking or maintenance of the point-of-sale terminals or whatever. Well, the problem, or the good news from a security point of view is it's a whole lot easier. The whitelisting products out there are a whole lot easier to use, a whole lot bigger whitelists and the like. When I was still at Gartner, I gave a Gartner award to Ritz Camera, who was using Bit9 to secure their registers and demo systems in the stores. So there actually are a lot of success stories, but bottom line is, since there are a whole lot of point-of-sale devices, and whitelisting generally means touching and putting an agent and managing every single one, it's not cheap. So that's often the biggest objection. The second one is that those local executables they want to run. Okay, so let's see, Eric, most of these other questions are going to be about some things you brought up. So let me first throw a question on so we can all be from a common baseline here. For what you showed, like you showed some information coming in a dashboard, what's sort of the architecture? How is the information getting into LogRhythm? Is it sort of a three-tier architecture with collectors, consolidators, and some back end? Or what's the architecture that you were essentially sitting at there?
Sure. So my system, LogRhythm, has a couple of ways to do it. So we do have collectors. We can do it. It can collect it remotely via syslog or remote Windows collection via native RPC. We do have endpoint agents if you really wanted to do it on it. But again, as John mentioned there, it can be it can be costly to put agents on every POS endpoint. I don't know if I would recommend it for huge. I guess I would if you have the money and have the cost. So we do a number of ways there, and then my SIEM actually, and I think some others, you'll have to look it up. Again, trying to be just vendor agnostic here, you'll have to look it up. But I think a lot of SIEMs support lists and a number of ways to do some whitelisting there. And since every process generates a Windows log, if you wanted to start off with processes and start somewhere, I would say most retail organizations have some kind of SIEM at one point or the other. So if you can, whitelist, start with whitelisting processes, and then we of course have, so once it gets the collector, it goes to a log manager, and then it comes up to my dashboard here that I can look at, and then I populate a list, and I'm lucky enough to, my AI engine here actually populates the whitelist for me, and we have learning mode, so I don't have to spend all the time, because I mean, how many people here could again tell me what processes should or should not be running on a POS system? So my AI engine, our AI engine is one of those tools that you can just say, go point it at a POS device, go learn what processes are on there, and I did this with a gold standard. That way I could do peer grouping with larger POS systems at that retailer. So I did it on a gold standard system, both network connections and the file integrity stuff we were getting, as well as the processes, and it was easy enough to say, go learn what's normal, and then I can just do peer grouping and say, all right, all of these are my stores, these are my front of the house systems, these are my back of house systems, they should all be acting similar, and as long as I'm collecting logs from them with my SIEM or via an agent, it sends it up to my collector, up to my event manager, and sends me an alerts and starts prioritizing which ones I go to look at first based on the number of anomalies that are happening at each location. I hope that answers the question fully.
Okay, so we had sort of a drill down question on a specific thing you brought up. you mentioned noticing an employee charging a smartphone. So the question was, did the system notify you of this, or was it visual, something an analyst scanning through things would have said, wait a minute, what's that?
No, actually, my system notified me of it. So that one we did have a local agent on the endpoint, and we have host activity monitoring. So if you have an agent on an endpoint, there's a number of different things my system can do for you. It doesn't matter. Again, there's lots of endpoint products out there, so I would honestly, because everybody's getting agent overload, especially on endpoint these days, whether it's antivirus, endpoint monitoring for SIEM, or whatever. So find the right one for your situation. But my particular solution happens to have endpoint monitoring. So we monitor everything from the registry to file to, we have this function called DLD, or Data Loss Defender, that monitors for USB devices or CDs being inserted, and we can automatically eject them if that's needed. Network connection, user activity monitoring, and a handful of others. So again, I would honestly, if you're interested in a technology that can alert you to that, I think as long as you have something on the endpoint that generates a log for that. I think there's also some Windows logs that could have generated that. So you can also, if you already have a SIEM, you can definitely look up that Windows event log ID and just have your SIEM alert you for USB device inserted or a CD-ROM. Also look up autoplay, because I had again, I'm looking for multiple points of validation before I take the time to go down there. So the thing that I ended up being alerted to there was something was inserted as a USB device, and then there was an autoplay function that also popped up, and it's also a Windows event ID. So if you can correlate those two events together, you have a pretty good confidence level that somebody's plugged something in and something's trying to autoplay on that, and that's horrifying on a POS device. So I hope that helps.
Okay, this might be a related answer. Can you handle point-of-sale systems that communicate out of band? In this case, they're saying to an attacker. For example, using a cellular network or other wireless datacom. How would you detect something like that?
In that case, I would honestly need something on the system like an agent, because we'd want to monitor all the network connections and anything plugged into that. And then again, it would obviously be an anomaly because you have a cellular connection or a Wi-Fi connection or something else that it's communicating to, and whether it's plugged into that or there's a new network connection or however that device is connected out of band, it would definitely raise a flag in comparison to the rest of my peers, because it has an extra network connection or it has something plugged in that allows it to communicate out of band. And that's going to generate logs, it's going to generate network activity, and it could potentially be generating file access, which it would have to, because you got to get, right, the file needs to get off the network some way, whether that's network, whether that's out of band, or whether that's by like a USB or CD-ROM. It needs some mode of transportation. So as long as you have your PCI controls in place and your critical files are being monitored for integrity with some type of file integrity monitoring, that's where I'd look for that, and then I'd look for the other anomalies there that I mentioned before.
Yeah, I think realistically having something on an endpoint where you could detect that's about the only feasible solution in a retail environment. There are solutions out there that are used by some government agencies, prisons, for example, to detect unauthorized cellular transmitters, or have areas where no cellular is allowed, and then put sensors in that are going to detect if there is any cellular signal coming out. Some of the wireless intrusion detection systems like Air Patrol had that, but in a retail environment where every customer is carrying a cell phone, that's going to be kind of hopeless.
Indeed.
But so there are, for real high security environments, I call this the MiFi problem, where what we're going to find is, I'm sure it's already happening, we haven't detected it yet, is where server admins are leaving their MiFi adapters in the data center so that they can come in through that path to maintain their servers overnight when can't get in through the firewall, then of course it's a huge vulnerability.
Yeah, but if I'm not wrong, also PCI mandates that you look for those kind of MiFis in there, right? You should have some type of.
Yeah, it mandates you look for Wi-Fi. It doesn't yet mandate that you look for anything outside of the Wi-Fi, the 802.11 spectrum.
Got it. Yeah. But definitely, I'll wait for the next update. I'm sure it's going to be there. We're only a year or two away, right? Too. Yeah.
Okay, got a couple other questions. Let me try to get to one here. Some of these are kind of not too answerable, but both Target and Home Depot were able to detect attacks, but the alerts were ignored by management. In your experience, I'll toss over you, Eric. What have you seen? How does LogRhythm help in that area where we're going to point out problems, but we can't necessarily get management to fix the problem?
Honestly, I think in any environment, and it doesn't matter if you're doing it with a LogRhythm or any other one, you just need those multiple points of verification that something weird is going on. I guess if I give you some background on myself, old military guy, and I worked in a number of different SOCs, and it was always my biggest fear that I would see something happen in my SIEM, and then I'd need to get authorization to cut off the path or something like that, and it's 2 a.m. and I don't want to pick up the phone and make that phone call to that colonel because if I'm wrong, I know what it costs, right? So best advice there, if you can have multiple points of verification, and this LogRhythm does that fairly well, as you saw, because we have multiple dimension. You can do multiple dimensional alerts. So I could take alerts not only from a threat list, as you saw there, a communication with a known bad IP, but I also then set off a rule and refed it back into my correlation engine and said, all right, I'm adding you to a watch list, and then that watch list kept watching for more communication out there, and then it fed into a higher risk rule because the activity continued to happen, and my confidence grows and grows and grows, and especially if I start getting some large outbound data transfers, or I know I'm talking to a known bad actor. I think having that set of data builds confidence and definitely makes it a bit easier of a conversation than I think this is happening, because that's really what I think we're afraid of these days, especially with SIEMs and so much data. It's all in one place. You have so many alerts. You got to figure out where that needle in the haystack is, where the actual threat is. And so if your SIEM can do some type of risk rating or risk scoring or some type of multiple correlated event rules, that's where I would start, and have multiple events showing that something is going on, because I think that's where it needs to go next in order to build that confidence level that something else is going on there. I don't know if you have any other experience, John, but that's how I would take it.
Yeah, what I'll throw in is, I think Target and Home Depot, two very different examples. If I remember right, in Target they had, I think it was a FireEye appliance that was pointing out malware on a certain machine. They then cleaned that machine, rebuilt that machine, and the malware came back and FireEye alerted again, and at some point they said, oh, those are just false alarms, false positives. We fixed the problem. So part of that tells you they really didn't have good enough visibility into the actual baseline of the machine, or they would have seen, oh, no, it did get reinfected again. Wait a minute. As soon as we restore user data or system data, the bad stuff comes back. So that, I don't think, was so much of an example of management pushing back as they didn't close the loop. They weren't using tools to recognize these patterns and have a true view of the baseline. The Home Depot one from the reports does appear that they were using, an older version of Symantec SEP11, didn't turn on some of the blocking features, and that was sort of one of these business objections, and more cost and more potential disruption. In that case, then they could have closed the loop by saying, okay, we purposely are leaving the door open here. We better watch the door. So if it took them 5 months to notice that malware was installed on point-of-sale devices that they knew they were unable to protect, they weren't watching them closely enough. So as I started out by saying, there's often going to be times where we can't fix the problem, and maybe we can't even shield it, so we really ought to expend all our monitoring resources watching those things, because those are the most likely things to go wrong. With that, we're just about out of time, so I want to just get to our final slide here, throw up some resources for you. I mentioned some of these where you can get more information. If you had a question we didn't get to or you didn't get a chance to enter in, you can send it to q@sans.org, or if you're one of the people who are going to watch a recorded version of this. And there's my Twitter handle. You can send me any questions as well, and we'll try to get you some answers. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jason for final words about the webinar.
All right. With that, I would like to say thank you so much to John and to Eric for your great presentation. A special thanks to LogRhythm for bringing this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. And for a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.
Great job, guys. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was really great content. Very meaty.